Hey all, here at OS Reviews. You're watching our video review of the Umidigi Bison. This is an affordable, budget, rugged Android smartphone that sells for around 150 bucks, and for the money you're getting a lot of bang for your buck. It comes with 6 gigs of built-in RAM along with 128 gigs of built-in storage, which is further expandable via a micro SD card slot. Furthermore, it has the octa-core Helio P60 processor, which is performing very well for this price segment. We even get a 48 megapixel primary lens from Sony that has some AI auto detection functions with a 16 megapixel wide angle lens and 5 megapixel depth sensor for bokeh effects, along with a 5 megapixel macro lens for close-up shots. There's of course a typical LED flash. As a rugged phone, the device has a overall IP68 water resistance rating. You can even use it to take photos underwater without any additional casing. Retaining a standard 3.5mm headphone jack, always great to see, and a pretty large 5000 mAh capacity battery, which is impressive, and the phone will definitely last you through at least a day or two's use before you need to really recharge it again. The fast charging also helps zip it up in around an hour and a half in our testing. The one thing I will say though is that the fast charging seems to only work best with the supplied wall adapter that they give you, which looks like this. It is a little bit picky because I tried charging it with a different cable and wall charger, and it seemed to only charge at standard speed. Now the rails of the phone are indeed constructed out of metal and aluminum, like we pointed out earlier in our unboxing, which do feel quite premium when you're holding it, but still, for a rugged phone it doesn't feel too thick or hefty. For example, contrasted with the Conquest S16 Pro, which is another rugged phone we checked out earlier this year, I can say that the Umidigi is still significantly thinner as well as lighter in the hands. We do have a side-mounted fingerprint scanner, which is pretty responsive and easy to use. It's always on, so you can tap to unlock it when the screen is turned off. On the side here we have a push-to-talk walkie-talkie button, which I'll talk about later on in this video, and on the other side of the phone there is a second multifunction key that you can program to do different things, like tapping once, for example, to open a certain app versus tapping 2 times or holding for a few seconds. We also have the power key and the volume rockers. These keys are all constructed out of metal and have a nice texture to them, so it feels very responsive and clicky. Now, as touched on previously, the last Umidigi phone we reviewed was the A7 Pro just a few months back, and I do think that the Bison is a better deal overall, unless you have to have the kind of beautiful aesthetics of the glass on the A7 Pro. That's because, again, for around the same price point now, the Bison has longer battery life thanks to the 5000 mAh versus 4000 on the A7 Pro, in addition to a better camera, 48 megapixels versus 16, in addition to having a faster processor. This one here is the Helio, again, P60 versus the P23 on the A7 Pro. So again, if you can make do with a phone that has a slightly more utilitarian look, it's not as shiny or flashy, I think that this is going to serve you better in terms of the real-world performance. The screen on the front here at 6.3 inches is a Full HD 1080p IPS panel, which has pretty punchy colors and good viewing angles. Perhaps the visibility could be a tad brighter, but all in all, it's a great quality panel, I think, for the price. Colors are also fairly accurate looking. There isn't really any color shifting or anything like that. Like most Umidigi phones, perhaps one of the best things about the software experience is it's very clean and unsolicited. We have essentially a vanilla install of Android 10.0 on this device, aside from some of the Google Essentials, the Play Store, and also a handful of toolbox features, which takes advantage of the extra sensors built into this rugged phone, like the ability for you to check out the ambient noise level using the microphone, as well as some other options. The pressure sensor to measure the air pressure around you, in addition to the compass, which is built on in. There's all the typical functions, by the way, like built-in GPS, 4G. This is a dual SIM phone, by the way, as well. And there's even built-in NFC. So you can use this phone for mobile payment, and you can use it for cashless payments at different registers, and it works pretty well. Again, NFC is a function that's a little bit harder to find at this low price point, so it's great to see it here. There's even a built-in pedometer app that uses the motion sensor to track how many steps you've walked. Overall, still has a clean, attractive look, I think, especially for a rugged phone. Some of these other apps, by the way, I installed them myself, some games, just to test out the performance further, but again, pretty much everything else that you see here is just stock Android, so you have well over 100 gigs of free storage out of the 128 gigs from the box that you can use to program with your own apps and content, as you can see there. There's even a face unlock feature if you want to use a front-facing camera. However, it's not quite as secure as using the biometric sensor, so I would stick to this if possible. And the other function to take note of here here is really the ability for you to customize this smart key, which is the button on the side that, again, you can single click, double tap, or long press to open up certain applications that you can adjust yourself. And overall, it's nice customization that I'm glad to see that you can find here. What you won't find, however, is a way to remap or program the second key on the left, which again is the walkie-talkie key. For some reason, this button here is locked, at least out of the box, so that whenever you tap on it, it opens up an application that's called Zello, which is a free push-to-talk app that anyone else that installs this application you can use to communicate with simply by tapping on this key and broadcast it to other members in your same group or chat. It's a pretty neat feature if you're, say, outdoors and camping and you want to quickly communicate to everyone all at once, and it's a nice little hardware feature. But I did find myself sometimes accidentally pressing this key when I was searching around for the power button, since there are so many buttons on the sides of the phones. And I do think that having the ability for you to change the control here to do something else, just like the other button, would have been nice to have. Alright, let's jump into the performance of the camera. As aforementioned, this is a 48 megapixel main sensor, at least at the highest resolution level. Of course, if you don't need up to 48 megapixels, you can turn the resolution lower. That will take up less space. There's other modes on here like an HDR for dynamic range. There's also the aforementioned AI mode, although it's not going to be perhaps the best in the world. It can make some smart adjustments depending on what object you're pointing it at, whether that's food or if you're outdoors in nature. It will try to bump up the contrast of certain colors and make it look a bit more vibrant, and does add a nice touch. In the AI mode, just like other cameras we've seen though, the resolution is changed down to about 12 megapixels. Take a look at switching into the micro lens, so you can get really close up within 3 centimeters and objects will be really sharp and in focus, so you're able to kind of explore a kind of a microscopic world around you in leaves, things like that. It's kind of a fun camera to play around with, although perhaps not the most practical that everyone will always use, but still is a neat little feature. And the other function that we have here is the opposite, which is a wide angle lens. It's very useful when you want to capture more within one shot. Has a 120-degree field of view, capture video up to 4K resolution. The portrait, using the depth sensor, you can also adjust the level of the artificial depth that you want to add to your image. And under extra, there is even a night mode, which can slightly improve the performance if you're in pitch darkness, as well as a pro mode that you can use to further adjust things like the ISO, the white balance, by using this wheel system that is reminiscent of some Nokia phones back in the day. Here's a closer look at some sample shots. In good lighting environments, I would say the camera performance is quite good. It's above average, I'd say, especially at this budget price point, since with the 48 megapixel Sony lens, you get plenty of detail as you're zooming in. The artificial bokeh also works nicely in terms of recognizing objects and people's faces. Here is the AI mode for capturing food. Colors do look pretty warm and overall still quite pleasing to the eye. Although it doesn't have an optical image stabilization, the digital stabilization is working quite well, I would say. And also some other objects here captured at night. This is a leaf, and you can see the colors here are actually reproduced quite well. We have a nice natural bokeh in this particular shot where the leaves in the background are kind of slightly fading out. And overall, you can definitely get some good enough shots as you are playing around with the camera. I also want to point out a pro tip. If you're trying to record video or take images underwater, of course the touchscreen won't be very responsive to your fingers as water is going to be surrounding it. So you can launch into the camera in the water mode just by tapping once on the multifunction key here, and afterwards it will say in underwater mode, you basically tap on the hardware keys to take an image instead. So for example, if I want to capture a shot here of this particular box, I can wait for it to snap into focus and then just tap on the shutter key once again, and that will save the shot. But the screen itself is locked, since you don't really need any accidental touches from the water that's pouring around it. Just tap on the key basically to take images, and then tap on the power key once to exit out of the interface. Let's take a closer look at the speaker quality next by jumping into YouTube. Alright, so turning the volume down a little bit, some takeaways is the speaker does get relatively loud at higher volume levels, which is good because you can also use it as a siren if you're in an emergency. However, the placement isn't the most ideal. It can get covered up a little bit easily. If you set it onto a table, it sounds fine because it's slightly elevated by this lanyard bump. However, I do wish that maybe it would be on the side or maybe even the front of the phone. It certainly isn't a stereo speaker, to be honest. So not the best in the world, but the volume itself output is decent. It doesn't sound too tinny, so if you're just using it for watching some quick clips, it will work alright. You can also connect to, of course, wireless headphones or Bluetooth speakers with built-in Bluetooth 5.0, or you can use your own with a 3.5mm jack. The screen quality, again, really is quite immersive and popping. You can full screen the experience, the colors again look great. The sensitivity of the screen is also quite high in terms of responding to the touch. It is using Corning Gorilla Glass 3 that further adds a bit of durability. So overall, very impressive and great experience for watching media with. The 6.3-inch display, again, is quite large and beautiful. General system navigation is fairly snappy and responsive. Didn't really encounter too much notable hints of lag or delay. So for the price point, again, you're talking about fairly decent performance. If we do a quick demo here of web browsing, it will also load up pages, again, in a reasonable speed. The overall reception quality of the phone, I would say, is also good. I was consistently getting around 3 to 4 bars. That certainly helps with loading back pages relatively quickly. Again, the 6 gigs of built-in RAM really enables you to do more multitasking than most of the other phones in this price range, which will still be using, say, 3 or 4 gigs of RAM at most. And that even used to be really the high-end flagships just a year or two ago, having just 4 gigs of RAM. So it's crazy to see now a budget $150 phone that has 6 gigabytes built on in. So plenty that you can use. You can even juggle, I would say, 10 tabs which are open in the browser and still keep them open and go back and forth between them and not really encounter too much delays there. Call quality here in the Seattle region using AT&T and T-Mobile also both seem to work really without too much hiccups. The microphone picked up my voice without any issues, and the earpiece also can pick up your voice fairly loudly and clearly. I guess the really last thing to talk about here would be just the gaming performance. Although it's not going to be as powerful as, say, the latest iPhone or Pixel device, overall you can play back most of the games that you would want to from the Play Store. Again, there's plenty of storage here, so you'll be able to really download anything you want, including titles like PUBG, Asphalt. Some of the more intensive apps will also run on this phone. It may just take a little bit longer for them to open up, but afterwards you can still play it back really without any problems. The phone does get a little bit warm as you are gaming for more than an hour, but never gets too hot. It doesn't really seem to thermal throttle in my testing, so the performance was quite stable. Although it's definitely not a gaming phone per se, it's still neat to see that they've paid some attention to detail here on those other parts in trying to make the phone perform as good as it can. After the games do open up and load, everything is pretty smooth and responsive as you're navigating along. Graphics also do look pretty good. Again, the screen quality is nice, and the long battery life here at 5,000 milliamp hours does mean you can kind of play the game for quite a while before even the power drains. So that's more or less it as far as our review of the Umidigi Bison. Overall, again, a pretty great value, I have to say, for the money, considering it's a fully waterproof, dust-proof phone that has a headphone jack, a long battery life, a processor that will more than hold up for daily tasks, a camera system which is slightly above average, although not industry leading, giving us plenty of sharpness, some extra sensors, and even fast charging at 18 watts with the Type-C port. So again, if you're interested, you can check out more details in the links down below. A great value, rugged Android smartphone overall. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That's been the Umidigi Bison.